Thank you so much. It's so wonderful to be here. I'll invite my panelists to come up. Melinda and Justin, are you here too? Do we see you? Oh, fabulous. Okay. So this is a panel of true luminaries. Not only have they published books of exceptional research and depth, but they are master educators. To my mind, some of the best teachers in higher education today. I highly recommend you read all of their articles and books, and if you're lucky enough, sneak into their lectures. But today I'm going to introduce them based on the programs and initiatives they have created and continue to run inside their institutions. Justin Dyer is Professor of Government and Inaugural Dean of UT Austin's School of Civic Leadership. Bryan Garsten is Professor of Political Science and Humanities and Faculty Director of the Center for Civic Thought at Yale. Melinda Zook is the Germain Seeley Osterly Professor of History at Purdue University and Director of Cornerstone, a program that has been replicated by almost 90 other institutions. Sarah Igo is the Andrew Jackson Chair in American History at Vanderbilt, and as Dean of Strategic Initiatives for the College of Arts and Sciences, Professor Igo has led and implemented a far-reaching curricular reform called the A&S College Core, and is currently the Faculty Director of Dialogue Vanderbilt. So I really want everyone to leave this room today understanding what each of you has created on your own campuses and the reasons you created it. So can you, relatively briefly, because we only have an hour, describe some of the challenges you are solving for and what you created? And Melinda, we can start with you and then go down the panel.
Okay, I'll be brief. So we started Cornerstone 10 years ago with, basically to solve the problem of low enrollments in the liberal arts. The president of Purdue told the dean of the College of Liberal Arts, you guys are not going to exist anymore if you don't do something. So I was charged with doing something, and my desire was to bring the STEM and business students, which are the vast majority of Purdue students, a liberal arts education through a new opening sequence that they would be required to do transformative texts 1 and 2. Now, over the years, that problem has been solved to a large degree because the students take that course, they learn what the liberal arts are, which of course are twice badly named, so you have to teach them about philosophy and history and political science, and lure them into liberal arts degree programs, which we have done. The larger question has become, since then, how to help them with the myriad of problems that we're seeing, and I suppose my panelists know about them as well, the mental health crisis, the deepening crisis of mental health after the pandemic, right? The fact that they are hyperactive, that they are easily distracted, and then the new challenge posed by AI. And so the program has been very adaptive. We seek to adapt to each crisis, which keeps coming every year, and so far we've been pretty successful. We teach 10,000 students every year in transformative texts, which is a great books program, basically.
Thanks. Thanks for being here, everybody, this morning, and to my colleagues on the panel, and to Tamara and the Jack Miller Center. It's actually really wonderful to have the work that's going on in higher ed recognized. I think sometimes if you read the papers, you think nothing good is happening in higher education, so I hope we will disabuse anybody of that notion today. I think at Vanderbilt we were solving for two different problems, but I think they're connected. One of them is the one that Melinda has already laid out beautifully, the kind of declining fortunes of the liberal arts, the lack of an argument for them, for our students, for parents and others, and in public culture writ large. I think the other, for me and for my colleagues at Vanderbilt, was the degraded texture of public conversation and argument. And I think those two things are connected. And my work in Dialogue Vanderbilt, and then also in building a new general education program at Vanderbilt called the Arts and Science Core, in a way really influenced each other. In our new core, we decided as a faculty, it took a little bit of work to get people to line up behind this idea, but to create a common intellectual experience for our students. And what that has meant at Vanderbilt is that every first-year student in the College of Arts and Science takes 2 courses over the course of their first year that are in common. All of the texts are in common, but in small seminars taught by our faculty. So we ran 140 sections of the course this year. The first half is called Being Human. The second half is called Science, Technology, and Values. And the beauty of the program is that we are all reading together. We are learning to, I think for some of the students, reconnect to their love of reading. We are engaging in deep and really big debates about the oldest of human questions. What do we owe one another? What is the search for knowledge about? Are there things we should not seek to know? Things like this. And we're doing it not only as a body of students, but across our faculty. So we can talk more about that as the discussion progresses, but I want to also say it was inspired by many of the things colleagues were doing, including Melinda at Purdue.
Good morning, everyone. It's really great to be here with so many people who've started and shepherded programs that I admire. There's really an incredible amount of work being done, and I thank Jack Miller in the center for bringing us together. You know, we were asked to think about the problem we were solving for, and actually, the big picture is that we want to allow young people to flourish, and that we believe that thinking hard about some of the fundamental questions that Sarah Igo just mentioned is a part of flourishing and also a part of good citizenship in a country like ours where, as was mentioned yesterday, the sort of patriotism we want is a reflective patriotism, which doesn't mean critical always, but it means thoughtful, reflective. And so we were motivated partly by concerns about the quality of public discourse, partly by trends in academia that had led to a decline in the number of courses where students could grapple with fundamental texts in the American tradition and take ownership of them. And I'd say the real problem that our effort tries to grapple with is a pedagogical one. And that is citizenship in the United States is for an unruly people. It always has been. We don't like being told what to think. We don't like being told what to do. And so how do you bring ideas to people who want to think for themselves and who don't want to take things on authority? And so we in the Civic Thought Center at Yale have really focused on that problem, trying to design formats, which I can talk more about, that allow students to take the material on and make it their own, to challenge it, to see the problems that the Federalist Papers or the writers of the Declaration or Lincoln or others, to see the problems they were facing as analogous to problems we might face, and therefore to start to feel the responsibility to think and to act in ways that will let us continue this experiment. So what does that mean concretely in practice? First, Yale had to confront the fact that it didn't always seem to meet its responsibility to its own neighbors. It wasn't always a good citizen. And so we worked hard to create a program for high school students in New Haven. We discovered that the effect on the undergraduate mentors in that program was just as great as the effect on the New Haven high schoolers, supported by the Teagle Foundation and others in this room. The undergraduates asked for their own programming. And we saw that there was energy out there. They were creating reading groups on their own, and we started to support the energy where we found it. And we decided to try to create a whole ecosystem on campus of small, serious conversation based on texts led by people on the ground with practical experience and professors with scholarly expertise. And that's what we've tried to do. So this year we had more than 85 events on campus, most of them small discussions. We invite speakers in, but we also ask the speakers to be quiet for a period of time and listen to the room discuss what they've said so that it becomes more of a conversation, less of a Q&A. And all that is really designed to grapple with this fundamental challenge, which is that, Edmund Burke called us a tolerable anarchy. There's something anarchical about Americans and independent. And that's important to capture. And it means we can't just put civic content in front of students and ask them to absorb it on authority. We need to make them want it, make them feel the need for it. And that's our goal.
In 1836, the second president of the Republic of Texas told the Texas Congress that education is the guardian genius of democracy. And the University of Texas adopted that as its motto, translated it into Latin. And that stands as a reminder of the importance of educating each generation for the task of freedom. And the professor who translated that into Latin chaired the committee that recommended as an inscription for the main building on campus, "Ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free." And now as you walk onto campus, you walk by the main building, and you'll see that inscription, and that was 91 years ago when the Board of Regents adopted that as an inscription. And the chair of that committee commented at the time that the admonition to pursue truth as a means to freedom is as noble a call to the youth as we can make. And so the question was, what problem are we solving for? I think the problem that we're solving for with our project at Texas is that we have not done that job very well for the last several decades, and this is a national story, I think true of higher education generally. And so our Board of Regents, just 3 years ago, asked us to create a new school at the university that would be dedicated to providing students an education steeped in the Western tradition and American constitutional history and preparing them for leadership in a free society. And so we see that as a perennial need and a perennial challenge. And this admonition that we have now and the charge that we have is to educate for freedom, both in the sense of a classical liberal education appropriate for free people, but also in the sense of a civic education specifically rooted in the American Republic and what it means to govern together in this republic and the institutions that we've inherited. And so is it a problem to be solved? Yes. Is the problem solved? No, I think it's a perennial problem. It's a challenge for each generation. As Reagan said, and as Hans mentioned yesterday, freedom is always one generation away from extinction, and I think that remains true. And so this task of educating for freedom is always with us, but it's a way to renew our efforts to do something that is vitally important for the next generation.
Oh, thank you. You won't realize this because you all described your programs as if they just should exist, but you're administrative wizards. Like what you've actually done in higher education is just an incredible accomplishment. So I just want to make sure everybody knows that. One of the things that I really enjoyed is when we started having this conversation, you all immediately moved to your classrooms. And there were so many small choices, innovations, physical choices of how you structure talking and silence, how you structure chairs. So I just wanted you to take us into your classroom. Feel free to share a story from your classroom that you're particularly proud of, but also maybe help us all understand what kinds of choices you're making to launch or really establish the kind of learning you're seeking. And Sarah, maybe we'll start with you and then move around.
Sure. I actually love thinking about the nitty-gritty of classroom design, syllabus design, curricular design. It's something I didn't know I liked until I, was thrust into it a few years ago and was involved in this project to reform our undergraduate program. I'm going to get pretty granular, therefore, and tell you.
I think there are
about some
many
of the
teachers
things.
in the room. So
Yeah, right, exactly. So speak your language. One of the things we decided early on was that we were going to be all paper. So in our first semester of our first year core, there are no devices anywhere, not even on the table. Got to stay in the bags and so forth. So that's one thing. We're recognizing the clamor for students' attention everywhere, and we're trying to make the classroom a space where that cannot intrude and where the focus is resolutely on the text in front of us and each other. So that's one thing. We use course readers, the kind I started teaching with years ago at the University of Pennsylvania. We give them leather-bound journals that they carry with them to every class and throughout the year and write in every single day by hand. We do a lot of scaffolding and feedback and things like that through that kind of in-class writing. And we also use a technique many of you probably are familiar with, but some may not be, called specification grading, where students can keep working on the same thing until they get it right. And it really has freed them to take risks they've told us that they wouldn't otherwise take. They do get a grade at the end of the course, but they don't get grades on particular assignments. They just get told it meets expectations or it doesn't yet meet expectations. And that's been really valuable. It's borrowed from another program. But the thing I wanted to mention just briefly here in terms of design that we've been working on, and it picks up on something Bryan Garsten said, is we really want the students to think of themselves as citizens in the micro sense, as citizens of the seminar. So we've been thinking about seminar citizenship and how you create a collective kind of tending of the classroom among students. And this, you know, in the face of what we know are to be some of the risks students feel about speaking their mind in class, the kinds of pressures they feel inside and outside the classroom for this. And so we've tried to be quite mindful in creating both the conditions for good seminar citizenship and to help students build that themselves through conversation in the first weeks of class, and then to reflect periodically 4 times over the course of the spring, for instance, on their own participation or citizenship in class. And they set goals for themselves, they meet with their professor to talk about them, they revise them over time, they write them down, they look back at them in their journals, and actually are held to account to some extent for how they,
Can you give us an example of a goal?
A goal, yeah. We give them a set. We actually develop a set together in class of the goals that people have for good conversations. It might be speaking more regularly in class. It might be speaking quite a bit less in class. Listening. It might be pulling drawing on a prior conversation, into the current conversation. It might be trying to more actively pull readings or insights from other classes into our class conversation and helping students understand what that, how that relates. So there are a whole bunch. They come up with their own, but we also supply them some as a starter kit. And the students, I think, really earnestly worked on this over the course of the semester. And I want, if I can say, I don't want to go on too long, but you asked about a specific moment in class. About midway through the semester this fall, we had students reading John Stuart Mill and Audre Lorde on the harms and benefits of free speech. This was after, of course, episodes on their own high school campuses and at Vanderbilt as well around, very, divisive arguments about what speech can do and cannot do. Students were nervous about talking about this. We actually had a debate in class, but channeled through John Stuart Mill and Audre Lorde. And I've never had this experience quite in this way before, that at the end of that class, I had a number of students linger afterwards and thank me for allowing them to talk about something they cared about in this sort of displaced way through other thinkers, and to realize that they could still be friends with people who they realized in that class had very, very different ideas about the power and damage of speech. So that's my story.
Great, the classroom, the classroom is the heart of what we do, but we have actually found in recent years real challenges there. In talking to students, they feel often that it's a performative space. There's always the evaluative element of the grading there, and more, in recent times they've really felt they couldn't just try out an idea because they would be held to whatever they said by their peers, as well as the instructor. And so a lot of our work so far has actually been co-curricular. It's been outside the formal curriculum. Those 85 events I mentioned, plus more than 20 ongoing reading groups, are all outside the formal curriculum. And the the students there, they read sometimes more than they do for class. The spirit of their conversation is different, more exploratory, more risk-taking. And so, and then the hope, and we've started to see this, is that when they build practices like that outside of the class, they can bring them back into the classroom, especially their expectations of what a conversation about a text should be change. So that's some of what we've been doing.
Wait, can you slow that down for a second? When you say their expectation about thinking about text has changed?
Their expectation of what a conversation about a text can be like, I think they're more likely...
Can you kind of paint that for us a little?
Yeah, I think they're more likely to link a text to their own lives, but not in a solipsistic, self-involved way, but just trying to integrate the conversation that's academic, not letting it be purely academic and performative for the grade, for the impressing the teacher sort of thing. Now that said, we do teach classes. I have a big new lecture over the last few years called The Common Good. I just taught a seminar on constitutional thought. And in each of those, though, we do try to capture the students' thinking. So here's an example of a kind of exercise. You know, often, in almost every class I teach, I find a reason to teach at least some of the Federalist Papers. And in teaching that, I often, I come in and I tell the students, I'm going to ask you a question now, and you're going to be embarrassed to answer it. But I want you to answer it anyway. And they, you know, people immediately get quiet, as you just did. And they think I'm going to ask them about sex or something like that. But I don't. I say, how many of you are ambitious? By a show of hands. And lots of hands go up. It's a political science class. I teach at Yale. And I say, how many of you would keep open the possibility of actually running for office one day, a local office somewhere? Hands go up. And then I go up the ladder. How many of you might keep open the possibility of running for a federal office someday, maybe the House of Representatives? Hands go up, fewer. Senate, fewer. And then I say, look, how many of you would not completely rule out the possibility of running for president one day? And usually there are just a few hands, and they're kind of embarrassed to admit it, but they do. And then I say, what about something higher? And that moment of awkward laughter is kind of the point of the exercise, because no one knows quite what I mean, and they had assumed I would be stopping at the presidency. And that leads to a conversation about our political imaginations, how we imagine the objects of our own ambition. And the fact that, for many Americans anyway, the presidency, an office that's only 4 years, that's incredibly frustrating for every person who's occupied it, the fact that that is the height of imaginable political ambition for many Americans is an incredible achievement of our Constitution. And it's not a purely legal achievement. It's a constitutional culture that we've been shaped by very deeply without even realizing it. So that's just like an example of how we try to connect their thinking about their own ambition, a deeply personal matter for all of them, and get them to see these questions about constitutionalism in a way that is different and fresh. It's not just a list of rights and procedures and offices.
Bryan, can I just ask you one more question? And then you had said earlier a phrase that has just stuck with me. You said one of your goals as a teacher, this is not on stage, but in our background conversation, is to help them think together or thinking together. I was just wondering if you could say a sentence about that, and then we'll move on to Professor.
Yeah, look, I think that's what universities are. They're spaces in society where we have time and space for thought. You know, we are in a very practical country, and there's a lot we have to do. And that comes down to making each classroom a place where you can voice a thought that may be wrong, hear how others respond, and refine and enlarge, as Madison put it, your thoughts. So I think universities are very special places in society, and their job is to protect thought without that thought becoming irresponsible and too removed from the society.
Thank you. Thank you.
I think a lot of us who are in higher education got into this because we had a great classroom experience as students. And that was certainly the case for me. I stumbled into a class as an undergraduate called Foundations of American Politics. And we read the political sermons of the founding era and the Federalist Papers, the Anti-Federalist Papers, the Lincoln-Douglas debates, Alexis de Tocqueville, and all of that. And I thought at the time, why didn't anybody tell me about this stuff? I had no idea we had. Well, this is really great. And I was hooked. And thinking about that class and what made it so special is really the professor in the classroom with the students. And he had all sorts of different teaching techniques. I remember having classroom discussions and having group projects. And at one time, he came in dressed as Abraham Lincoln and answered questions as Lincoln when we could feel. And so it was a great classroom experience. And the writing assignments were open-ended. It was, the last paper of the class was write a paper that ties in any theme you want in the class for 20 pages, and it gave you this ability to be creative and synthesize ideas and to work through things. So that was a really formative experience for me. I've had great classes that are taught in a seminar setting with small groups of students around texts. I've had great Socratic classes focused on constitutional law. I've had great lecture courses where, professor is a master teacher in front of the classroom. And so I think part of what we're trying to do with our project is bring people together who love their subject, who love the classroom, who love their students, and trust that they're going to be able to do that in a way that fits with their teaching style, that's going to be the best for the students. And I think a variety of different approaches will be good. But one anecdote about that faculty member who I had as an undergraduate student retired recently, and that class is not going to be taught anymore. And they will not replace him on the faculty with somebody who does that kind of work. And so a big payoff of what we're doing is we're reinvigorating that kind of education and creating opportunities for people to come into higher education. And then once people are here, they're here for generations. They're often, this is a job you can grow old in. And so people will be in the classroom impacting students for decades. And I think that's a really big part of what we're doing. And we hope to create space for faculty members to treat the classroom as an important place for conversation and for the transmission of a whole cultural and political tradition that is worth preserving.
Thank you.
What was the question again? So Justin started off with saying, you went into that class and you love those books, and why didn't anybody teach those before? But the key here is really not the books, it's the teacher. And the faculty are everything. So the one that they showed before we all went on, she's obviously gorgeous, right? She knows how to reach them. So the texts matter. I'm not saying they don't, and we do it exactly what Sarah does. It's all paper. I always say buy the book and then destroy it by writing marginalia all over it, right? And sometimes that's the only thing they bring in their phone, which they have to put away. So I'll just give I had a really good episode with them in Transformative Text 1. We were reading Antigone, which works so well because it's about justice and what do you owe the state, what do you owe yourself, what do you owe your family. And so it brings up all these ethical questions and, categories of morality. And then we got on to shoplifting because, how many of you have broken the law, right? And slowly but surely, everyone had shoplifted. And how much can you get away with at Target before you get caught? And it was extremely interesting, and it was the one time absolutely every student participated. Was it right? Was it wrong? And by the end, everyone had, including yours truly, because of a misbegotten youth, and it was a lot of fun. And it's moments like that where everyone's participating and everyone's excited, and the texts have been brought alive for them. You said they're reading as to how the texts impact them. That's the best thing you can hope for, right? That they're reading to find something that tells them about themselves and their life and their world. The whole project that all of us are involved with is to give them purpose and meaning and inspiration, and all those things that have been taken away from them for so long, we're trying to give back.
Can I ask you a question? I want to move on to more macro questions about higher education, but before I do, it's been such an important theme of this conference to talk about literacy and how we read, and I just wonder if any of you, and you can just weigh in, how do you get students to read? Like, what are your techniques there?
Me again?
Yeah, you are welcome to go, Melinda.
So,
you are one of the masters
I'm
of this,
holding
so
it.
I feel like you should.
So close reading is extremely important, and reading with them. So I use a lot of plays and poetry. Antigone, playwright. I use a lot of short story, and we do it together. And I'll just put a little, I'll shout out something we just started. We do a lot of co-curriculars, so it's not just that you're in the classroom with us, but you're outside of the classroom with us, and we're doing a lot of other events. You know, at first it's like film screenings, but they don't sit still for 2 hours, so that's not so good. But we started something that's only 50 minutes called Reading Aloud, where a professor comes in, Sebastian is one of them, and reads something like the Gettysburg Address or a short story that's, you know, like 4 pages long, The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas. And it's all free. They don't come, we don't care. We get 100 students every time we do this. Just sitting there and listening, they have the story in front of us, and listening to it and then asking questions. I didn't think it was going to work. And it's just shocking how much students need just this kind of edification.
On the reading front, I stole from Melinda this co-curricular idea, not the 15 minutes, which is new to me, but the idea of having students read something and then attend some kind of collective event, because they're all reading the same thing in small seminars to bring them together. So this year, our students read a play, RUR, if anybody knows it, Rossum's Universal Robots, in class, and then our theater department, because they knew we'd all be reading it, adapted it. And it was so interesting first to see that students, how many of them had never been to a play before, an actual play, and then how fruitful the conversations were about the adaptation, that you could play with someone's words and do something different with them. But the thing that I wanted to mention is that we've been experimenting with something that we also weren't sure would work, but was just incredible, and I almost wish we could do it every day, but then I would probably have to hang up my hat as a teacher. And that is, we instituted a reading day in our core class. So we asked students to come to class. They have to be in class and bring a book that was a pleasure reading book. It could not be something they were reading for class. We'd bring donuts and coffee and so forth, but we would just sit together for an hour and 15 minutes and read together with no distractions. And it was an incredibly powerful experience. Students, you could see, were sort of antsy in the beginning because they have gotten so used to picking up their phones every 10 minutes, you know, in the middle of reading something, if they're reading something. And to watch them kind of sink into a text and to read it over, and then to talk about it on the way out of class was really wonderful. And I would like to do it more. I can imagine the parental reaction. You're just having our students sit here and read together in class as being, you know, perhaps it's not something we could do all that often. But I really believe that creating structured places for students, both to talk and to read and to write, are the key to reinvigorating some of these habits of mind and practices that we so want them to have.
I'll just say briefly, we are focused on, we sometimes say saving reading casually, but the truth is the students read all the time. I mean, they don't even talk on the phone, they text. So they're reading texts, they're reading chat, they're reading online. So it's really a question of what students are drawn to read. That's what we have to work on. And we find that we do have to give them the experience of reading a difficult text that at first seems opaque or distant, and discovering that actually they can get something out of it, unexpected, that there's a reward there. And if you give them that experience a few times, so then they no longer see a difficult text and just walk away or ask for a summary of it. And then they're drawn into the language, and the sentences are longer, and the ideas are more complicated. And there's a kind of character education, I think, that goes on there, an education in patience and focus and steadfastness even. And, you know, I think citizenship and reading a certain kind of text are linked. And so we are working on that by, yes, reading with them in person sometimes, some difficult passages, to give them an experience which they can then try to replicate at home and at larger scales.
I think every generation likes to complain about the current generation, and so I don't know how much of this is warranted and how much of this is just getting to an age where I can complain now about the kids these days, but the bar seems to be fairly low in terms of what we're expecting of them. And at the University of Texas, we're a flagship university. We have most of our students graduate in the top 5% of their high school graduating class. So these are some of the best students in the state. And reading is hard. It's an expectation that they're not used to. They often, K to 12, are not expected to read a lot. And so the students struggle with it. It's something that we have to work on. I think attention spans are much shorter. I think the digital revolution is partly to blame for that. But it is a exercise that's extremely important for them. And so being able to sit down with themselves in the quiet with their phone off to focus and concentrate on a serious book with serious ideas and to labor through that is an important exercise for them. So we try to encourage as much as we can. And some of the techniques are to pare down the reading, focus on something short and manageable, make sure that you really did read it, and we're going to discuss this. Some of it might be even the extracurricular things we do, having a book club that you don't have to read. Show up, and we're going to read a passage together and then discuss it. It's a low barrier to entry, and students respond really well to that. Once they have that experience, they see that it's a valuable thing, and they understand it, but I think it's a lot of habit formation that has to take place, and the skills and the virtues necessary to do that kind of deep reading, which is why I think this kind of civic education is so focused on the deep knowledge that comes from fundamental books and texts that are creative of the whole tradition.
I love this. I want to try all of these things. I also just love Peggy Noonan yesterday talked about reading as offering subtlety. I love this also as patience, like all these other just kind of beautiful refining of the soul that you get from slowing down and taking an idea seriously and wrestling through it with others, which is something you really only get to do through education. Like, it's very hard to find those collective environments, so I just really appreciate those thoughts. I kind of want to go up to the balcony a little bit and talk about higher education. And just what do you think your work means for higher education? What do you think is replicable? What do you think people should be paying attention to? And a little bit, because you are such administrative wizards, what have you learned from this process that you think other faculty members could learn? And Bryan, maybe I'll start with you and go around that way.
Sure. I think one thing that's exciting about being here and about the experience I've had is that it shows you can build new things. I, like many people, was full of frustrations at certain trends in the academy and in my own university, roadblocks I hit. And it's tempting to want to tear down the bad things, but actually I've found again and again that it's better to try to put our energy into building good things. And that's because of a psychological principle that I think is very important, which is that people love what they build. If you get people building something, they're likely to take care of it. They're likely to put a lot of their own energy into making it work, at least. And then you have a generation that's really invested in something. And the other things that you're upset about, they will wither away, like everything does. And so I think the principle is build. You can start small. You can, as I did with this Civic Thought, it was an initiative before Yale recognized it as a center. I didn't ask anyone's permission. I just started doing things with students. And if it's good, and if you have a core of passionate teachers and students, people come to it, and it grows. So principle number one, I would just say, people love what they build, so let's put our energy to building things.
I think every institution is different, and there are different norms and cultures and histories and people on the ground, so it's complicated in its own unique way in every place when you're trying to engage in a project of academic reform or academic entrepreneurship. On the other hand, academic institutions are all very similar. I think similar challenges, similar problems. When we all compare notes, people understand what those challenges are. And for people on the outside, it's often opaque to them. It's not like running a privately held company. It's not like managing a sports team. It's maybe something like trying to manage the medieval church. It has a certain kind of structure, certain kinds of norms. If you don't understand it and you don't inhabit it, it's hard to know how to navigate it. But for those of us on the inside who have stakeholders and constituents and supporters from the outside who will trust you and support you and help you navigate that institution, I think there's a lot that can be accomplished. And so you were asking about what's replicable. Probably not advisable for every institution to create a new school. We're a freestanding college within the university. It doesn't happen very often. It hasn't happened in a long time. It probably will be a long time before we do that again. But there are all sorts of different ways that you can think about new courses, new faculty lines, a way to impact the general education curriculum of the university. And then increasingly, one of the things that we all have to think about together is how do we impact graduate education. We haven't talked about it a lot, but a real challenge, it's a great challenge to have, but there are so many new opportunities for faculty working in these areas. It's not a problem that was on anybody's bingo card 5 years ago, but now we have a challenge with producing the next generation of faculty members to go into and to make good use of all of these new opportunities. And so something we have to collectively think about is the graduate pipeline problem.
I just want to make sure you are part of what is also a national movement. Can you just say like a few words so everyone understands how these centers for civic thought are working, how you see what is replicable, what is very specific, and just so we understand it?
Yeah, sure.
And also, if you have an idea for graduate education, will you share it?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. On the national network, so we're a new school or college at the University of Texas. There are versions of this that exist in Arizona and Florida, North Carolina, Tennessee, Ohio, and other places. And then there are versions of this in the elite private institutions like Yale and Stanford and other places. So a real renewed emphasis and focus on civic education and liberal education as being a part of what we want to do in higher education, and a renewed commitment to that. And so what does that look like? In some places it may look like a center that exists within a department and a faculty member who's running it. It may look like a center that has the authority to hire new faculty, which is a really important thing for these things to work well and to flourish. Or it could be a whole existing college structure within the university, and there are several like that now taking root. The important thing for us in thinking about the graduate education piece is having places for students to go and study to become professors. And part of the challenge we've had is that graduate education, getting a PhD in a discipline, is not like going to med school or to law school. It's not a one-size-fits-all model. You don't get the same basic curriculum wherever you go. It's an apprenticeship model. And so if you're interested in a certain topic that you want to pursue research on, you have to find a faculty mentor who wants to take you on as a mentee, who will advise your project. And the emphasis is always on novelty. You have to say something new. And so you have to come up with a project. It's got to be original. You're going to do original research. You're going to say something new and contribute something to the world of scholarship that wasn't there before. And that doesn't always fit well with, I want to study the American Revolution. I want to study the Civil War. I'm interested in the Founding Fathers, the Federalist Papers. And so those areas of scholarship, for all sorts of benign reasons, in addition to some not so benign reasons, have largely dropped out from American higher education and the graduate training programs around the country. So how do we reinvigorate that? I think partly it's equipping the professors that are here now with the ability to train graduate students. That may look like creating new interdisciplinary PhD programs while we can. And I know the Hamilton School has a new PhD program. We're working on proposing a new PhD program. I think that will be important. But it's also identifying people in the disciplinary units across the country who can take on graduate students like Bryan at Yale and others who can produce the next generation of scholars. And then for groups like the Jack Miller Center to help with that network, as they've been doing for the last 22 years, in creating the networks and the pipelines for opportunities for those students to then enter the profession and to have long careers in higher ed.
Justin, you said to create the new generation of scholars, and Melinda, I want to get to you because you have actually built a total national model. And anyone can answer this, what do you think is the balance in higher education between creating scholars and creating teachers? Because I feel like really what you have stressed on this panel is this incredible importance of teaching and the amount of thought that you put into your classrooms. So I just wanted, if any of you want to weigh in on that a little bit, because is reiterating this focus on scholarship really what we need for kind of the next 215 years?
Yeah, I'd say briefly, and then I'll let others jump in, but the world of higher education is a big, wide world, and most of American higher education is not taking place at Research 1 universities where research is emphasized. And so in order to punch your ticket to get into higher ed, in order to be a part of the professoriate, being able to demonstrate your credibility in research is really important, and you have to do that to get your PhD. But beyond that, many of the job opportunities that people have and many of the careers that are going to be available and many of the most fulfilling careers are going to be teaching-oriented positions where research is not as emphasized. But I kept saying scholarship because that's how I'm often trained to think in an R1 institution where we're thinking we want people who can play at a high level, who can produce high-level scholarship, and then of course, for projects like this, the real impetus is the undergraduate teaching. So the reason why we're doing this, the reason why the charge that we got from our regents was to provide an education for students steeped in the Western tradition and the American constitutional tradition. And so in order to do that, in order to fulfill that teaching obligation, we also have to have people who can come in and be credible and serious high-level researchers.
What do you want me to speak on? What do you want me to speak on?
I would love you to talk a little bit about, Melinda, what it has looked like to build a national model, and how do you create something that's replicable? How do you think about your work?
So first of all, I should say I'm entirely grateful to the Teagle Foundation, to Andy, to you, to Lonnie, that have helped me, because we would have just been Purdue, right? But we were picked up by the Teagle Foundation as something that could be replicated. And I thought it was 85. You said it was 90 now.
Getting there.
So I'm very pleased there are these cornerstones out there. They're all different, and every institution is different, and some of them are at the community colleges, and some of them are at the smaller liberal arts colleges, and some of them are at R1s. But the key, I think, above all, is general education. And that, I think, is our doorway in to
Can you just define that for people who are new to academia in this room?
Oh.
What is general education? What do you mean when you say it? How do you rethink it?
Well, it's different everywhere, but most universities have a core group of classes that the students have to take, usually their first and second year. And so that would be English composition or, a basic math, a science course, et cetera, and so forth. With Cornerstone, what we were able to do is gobble up English composition and the speech course and take them over. They were being taught by graduate students. They were 100 years old. They were they had not adapted to the students of today. We put in faculty, tenure track faculty or full-time teaching faculty, and it's an entirely different experience when you're using great books. Right? But you can still teach writing, and you can still teach speech, and listening, and understanding, and close reading, and critical thinking, and all the things that they need. So general education became the doorway in to reaching 10,000 students now a year, and then they can do a certificate. These are in Cornerstone, and most of the mini Cornerstones throughout the nation have the certificate as well, where they can do 3 more classes and get a certificate in the liberal arts. That has helped the STEM and business students quite a bit, right? It shows that they have superior communication and critical thinking skills. Not all of them do it, but many of them do, because they're all classes in what Purdue calls the core, or general education. So they're double dipping, and that has helped us tremendously. And I think it's the first year onboarding sequence, and then the pathways. These are the language that Lonnie gave me years ago, and that has been replicated across the nation. And there, again, the kinds of replications are different. Sarah, they have a set syllabus, a set reading list at Purdue, because it's just so huge, and there's so many faculty involved, over 100. It's not a set reading list, but there are a set list of books that they could choose from. So yeah, it's different, but it's been, for Purdue, it's changed the way the students act. One of them told me recently that what it gave him was the ability to take the knowledge from that class into the next class, into his life. He said it's the knowledge that travels with you. And I love that. Of course, I'm stealing it and using it in publications, et cetera, and so forth. But that's what one of our students said.
Sarah, I would love you to weigh in a little bit about what you've learned from this process and what you think is replicable for other institutions.
Sure. Well, you have an example right here of, you could say replicate or you could say stealing. There's one of the things I have learned is that the community of faculty who are thinking about these issues are very generous. They've become converts to reviving general education, to thinking about what kinds of texts work well in these kinds of courses. And they're ready and eager to share. That's one of the things that has been actually a different experience, honestly, in higher education for me. And not that people, really we tend to work as institutions rather than across our various lines. And the generosity of spirit, I would say, among faculty who've worked and kind of become evangelists for these kinds of programs is really remarkable. And there are others in the room here. But I do want to also shout out to the Teagle Foundation, which has also allowed that network to thrive among faculty who are hoping to be builders of new programs, as Bryan suggests. So one of the lessons for me has been that, and that not all of the borrowing needs to be large scale. Institutions only once in a kind of academic generation tend to rip everything apart and put it back together in the curriculum. There are other kinds of interventions and sharings that take much less startup. And I have thought about Bryan's program many times, beginning small and then, something emerging organically and becoming much larger is another way to think about how things replicate and grow. And I'm just thinking about the other side of my work at Vanderbilt with Dialogue Vanderbilt. One of the easiest things we've done, and it is absolutely replicable, and we are sharing it actually with lots of other universities, is something we're calling a speakeasy, where we invite students. They get an invitation to, and this is not a curricular program, it's absolutely extracurricular. We invite students to come to an event, and we don't tell them what it's about exactly. And then we invite them to put a question that they're a little bit nervous about, but really curious about what their peers would, how they would weigh in on it, into a hat or something. And then we have a couple of student moderators who are there just to kind of keep things moving. The students, pull questions one by one out of the hat and start talking about them. And these, again, this was an experiment, very low, it takes nothing to set this up. The first few of these we scheduled for an hour. They kept on going. I think at 3 hours, the students are like, is it okay if we go? we have things to do. But the students kept on talking, and they asked sort of plaintively, and I think this is a poignant data point for me, could we do this again? And this is replicated again and again on our campus, this very easy exercise of what would have seemed to me a generation ago in college had been just the way we operated, right? We talked about things in the hallways and in dorms late at night and things like that. We're finding we need to structure them. But anyway, that's an example of something that doesn't take a big committee or it's just a little design that any campus can try. It's in the extracurricular part of campus, but I think we'll have, some kinds of, leakage back into classes, creating expectations for the kind of conversations students want to have.
Yeah, I love the different suggestions that are co-curricular and inside the classroom and structural, and how you can see how successful a campus can be when they're doing all of it at once. So thank you for that. I have one last question, because we just have a few minutes. You are all such spectacular teachers, so I would love to close by asking you to read a line from a text you love to teach and share what it offers you and your students. And Justin, would it be okay to start with you?
Fine to start with me. I would be horrified if one of my students pulled out a phone during class. I would never allow that to happen. But thinking about America 250 and where we are today and what we're celebrating, one of the classes that I teach is on constitutional rights. We'll go through Supreme Court cases focused on some of the big questions that have come up in the course of U.S. constitutional history. One of those big cases, of course, is Dred Scott versus Sanford. But it won't just be the Supreme Court cases. In addition to reading the majority opinion, dissenting opinion, I'll have them read some other primary sources, including the speech that Abraham Lincoln gave at Lewistown, Illinois, in August of 1858. And before the Lincoln-Douglas debates, Lincoln would follow Douglas around the state and give a speech on the same spot that he gave a speech the day before, and finally got him into agreeing to a series of debates. So this is what he said in Lewistown the day after Douglas had given his speech. He said, "These communities," talking about the colonial era before the Declaration, "these communities, by their representatives in Old Independence Hall, said to the whole world of men, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they're endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." This was their majestic interpretation of the economy of the universe. This was their lofty and wise and noble understanding of the justice of the Creator to his creatures. Yes, gentlemen, to all his creatures, to the whole great family of man. In their enlightened belief, nothing stamped with the divine image and likeness was sent into the world to be trodden on and degraded and embruted by its fellows. They grasped not only the whole race of man then living, but they reached forward and seized upon their farthest posterity. They erected a beacon to guide their children and their children's children and the countless myriads who should inhabit the earth in other ages. Wise statesmen as they were, they knew the tendency of prosperity to breed tyrants, and so they established these great self-evident truths that when in the distant future some man, some faction, some interest should set up the doctrine that none but rich men or none but white men were entitled to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, their posterity might look again upon the Declaration of Independence and take courage to renew the battle which their fathers began, so that truth and justice and mercy and all the humane and Christian virtues might not be extinguished from the land, so that no man would hereafter dare to limit and circumscribe the great principles on which the temple of liberty was being built. And there's so much there to unpack and for our students to talk about, all in that one speech, and it's a great thing to pair as we discuss the fullness of American constitutional history.
Okay, well, whenever I get a new faculty member, which is all the time, I always tell them, teach the texts you love, the ones that inspired you to become a faculty member, to pursue a PhD. And you have to go back to your undergraduate degree when you were broadly trained. So I'll give you a couple lines from a poem and you tell me what it is. Let us go then, you and I, when the evening is spread out against the sky. Audience, come on. I can't hear. It's proof rock. Okay, there we go. All right, proof rock. And I always use proof rock as the icebreaker when I start a new semester with students because it's a beautiful poem. It's an invitation in, but it's also, it can be really harsh and raw, and it's about social anxiety. It's about who am I? How do I ask somebody for friendship or love? How do I fit in? And the lines like this, oh, do I ask what is it? Shall I let us go and make our visit? And it's full of those kinds of things, a decision that a minutes will reverse, right? The students and I go through it line by line. It takes us, 2 class periods, and by the end of it, they absolutely love it. And not just the line about the coffee. Shall I measure out my life in coffee spoons, okay? All right.
So the text that comes to mind for me is, it was an article actually published by Randolph Bourne in 1918 during World War I. A theorist of pluralism, Louise mentioned pluralism and the great American tradition of pluralism earlier. He was one of its most eloquent, I would say, advocates. And what's interesting in teaching this to students is that he wrote a long time ago. He wrote, more than a century ago. His language is full of somewhat, distasteful characterizations of, pure New Englanders versus illiterate Slavs and so forth. But he's articulating a really radical theory of American democracy as being something more than the melting pot. So this is an argument against the melting pot and what he calls Anglo-Saxonism. And here's the line. There's so many, it's hard to choose from this essay, which I recommend to you. It's published in The Atlantic. Surely we cannot be certain of our spiritual democracy when, claiming to melt the nations within us, to a comprehension of our free and democratic institutions, we fly into panic at the first sign of their own will and tendency. I love that sentence and all that is in it about the kind of radical faith in a culturally pluralistic democracy. And I love it in part because it helps, I think, do the same work that we were talking about earlier, inspire students to read great books and to reconnect to great literature and great founding documents and things like that. It also helps them connect to the something inspiring. Some of them would say it almost makes them embarrassed to think about, but the really beautiful rhetoric and hope that accompanied the creation of American democracy. So I see it as a really inspiring and challenging text at the same time.
Great. Well, I've brought a line that many of you will know from the Federalist Papers, Federalist 51. If there's one thing we teach in civics, it's checks and balances. But how exactly are those supposed to work? And the line is, the passage, the great security against a gradual concentration of the several powers in the same department consists in giving to those who administer each department the necessary constitutional means and personal motives to resist encroachments of the others. And then famously, ambition must be made to counteract ambition. The interest of the man must be connected with the constitutional rights of the place. It may be a reflection on human nature that such devices should be necessary to control the abuses of government. But what is government itself but the greatest of all reflections on human nature? So first of all, reflections on human nature doesn't mean just that government reflects human nature. Reflections on means a criticism. It's a criticism of human nature, and the passage goes on to say that if we were angels, we wouldn't need governments. But there's also this about the passage that I love to focus on, which is the interest of the man must be connected with the constitutional rights of the place. That is, an office should shape the motivations of the person occupying in it, so that, say, a senator would regard it as an insult to his personal ambition and dignity if the Senate's prerogatives were trampled upon. And that combination of personal and official motives is what's meant to drive the checks and balances. And that means that we can take not a pious attitude towards checks and balances, just wishing that they existed, but in institutional design. We can see that problem they were trying to solve as a problem we can think about if things aren't lining up that way now, if people aren't feeling office affecting their personal ambitions and interests in that way. Why is that? We can think about that kind of ecology and the politics of these offices today. That is, we can take the problems in the text as still ones that are relevant to us.
Thank you so much. Please join me in thanking our wonderful panelists.